and I added this tambourine right here. Again, it's not very frequent in the loop. It only hits once every bar. So I added a tiny bit of random, not as much as the percussion. And then I rolled off the lows around 240, which is just where I thought it sounded good. And that's pretty much it. That's all I did. I also panned it a little bit to the right, so it wasn't clashing with the hi-hats, because they are around the exact same frequency. Let's see, and then claps. Okay, claps here. First thing is that I know the kick is hitting on 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I lowered this one right here. I moved it back a little bit from the 3 just to make sure that it wasn't overlapping with the kick. Sounds a lot better that way. It saves your compressor a lot of space and trouble. It clears up a lot of room for the kick, makes your kick stand out. I always want to make sure that whenever possible I don't have other percussion elements going over the kick. So I did that, and then right here, since the kick is hanging on 4, this one could be a little longer. It also makes it kind of like, it adds suspense to the kick. It makes it kind of flow into the kick. Let me play that for you. It sounds better. Let's see, what else did I do? Highs, I did the same thing as the percussion. I just rolled off the bottom. For the claps. The claps are all about the mid-range, all around the 1000 range, really, for electronic claps. So all I did here, I think I looked at it on the spectrum analyzer and just saw where it was already rolling off on its own, and I just helped that roll off, and I helped that roll off on the top end too. I'll play it without it. Sounds a little bit thicker and more muddy without the EQ on. So whenever possible, I always drop off the lows and the highs. Alright, so the next thing I did was add this drum aux right here. Now what's going to the drum aux is everything but the kick. Everything but the kick. So right here, oh, I forgot to tell you that I rolled back the claps a little bit too for the milliseconds, because you can see it hits in multiple places. So the same thing as the snare. Anyway, for the drum aux right here, I did this cool little trick that I do a lot, which is that I added reverb to it. Now this reverb is at 100%, so it's kind of like it's a send. And then I added a second chain right here by clicking hitting create chain, and this is just the dry, regular drum track. So this is everything but the kick. I'll show you without the reverb. So right here, all I did is I used the drums room preset from Ableton, and I rolled off the lows below about 200, and then I actually put a high shelf filter around 8000, lowered it a couple, because you don't want a lot of highs in your reverb, otherwise you won't be able to hear the highs from your instruments. It will soften the highs, and I want my highs to stick out on my drum track, especially for things like the cymbals or hi-hats or whatever. So it helps to do that. I do that all the time with my reverb. The reason why I like to do this instead of putting it on a send is because this way, go to the next step, once I group all of the drums, including the kick, I put a little bit of a compressor on them. And this is pretty much my go-to preset, around 4 for attack, but for this kick it sounded better at 6. 200 for release, 4 for ratio, 0.4 for knee, and on the opto setting. But I play around with it, whatever sounds good for your particular set of samples. And the reason why I like to do that is because then the reverb is being compressed with all the drum samples instead of being on its own over here with the sends. I think it sounds a lot better if you compress the drum ambiance together with the drum samples. Just my experience, but I've also done it before where I've used sends for the drum tracks. Whatever sounds good. Try, experiment, you know, play around. I don't like to add a reverb on the kick usually because it buries out the bass and you do not want that to happen, but for some songs it does sound good to add the kick in with the reverb, and in that case I just put the reverb right here before the compressor. That's a cool little trick I do a lot, is use the racks to add reverb whenever I know that I won't need the reverb for anything else. Alright, so here's the final loop after I added all those little tricks in together. Now, the most important thing you got to remember is use good samples. If you use good samples, you won't have to do much processing. If you use shitty samples, you will have to do a lot of processing, but you know, some people like to do that. It's really up to you. I find that I'm very picky with my samples. Like, I love this kick. I do almost no processing on it. I use it all the time, and it's taken me forever to find good kicks like this. If I get a sample pack of like 300 samples, 300 kicks, I usually keep like 10. So be on the lookout for that kind of stuff. Alright guys, feel free to ask me questions or post any comments below.